Imagine Jesus walking into your church's Easter service this year, only to find the hype of a helicopter that's going to drop thousands of plastic Easter eggs on the crowd below. The worship team and the band, they play like they're headlining Coachella before they retreat into a swanky green room. And then in the service, you find the Easter Bunny on stage tossing out t-shirts before the sermon starts with an illustration, including a 420 weed reference. Now, ask yourself the question, is this the gospel being shared, or is it just gimmicks to fill a room? And in this episode of the Church Disrupted podcast, we're going to peel back that pastel curtain and take an honest and biblical look at what Easter has become in much of modern evangelicalism. Now, has Easter become this? Does this problem exist? Do these issues exist in all evangelical churches? Absolutely not. But in too much of our evangelical Christianity, in evangelical Christian circles, perhaps Easter has become something different than what it was meant to become. And we're going to walk through some of those real concerns and troubling trends about the way that churches are advertising, promoting, and celebrating Easter. And we're going to wrestle with whether we're actually inviting people to join the kingdom of God or whether we're just entertaining them into a faux kingdom with a false sense of salvation. And stick around, because by the end of this conversation, whether you agree with my takes or you think I'm way off base, we're going to look together at some real steps that we can take to put Jesus back on Easter's center stage in our churches. So why does this matter? Because inevitably, there are going to be some people who watch this and think, Jeff, you're just being too nitpicky. You're being too hard on churches. But here's why this matters to me. The resurrection is the most important event in human history. And I think it deserves a lot more than confetti, hashtags, and gimmicks. It deserves more than that. Yet every year, it feels like we're moving further away from the message of the cross and closer to what feels like a bad brand campaign. And while these tactics may fill pews, and let's be real, they will fill pews, they will put butts in seats, we have to ask the question, are we making true disciples, or are we just counting heads? Are we preaching repentance, the kind of repentance that transforms people's lives, or are we just promoting a product that's wrapped in shiny gospel packaging? Okay, so in this episode, I want to give you 3 troubling trends about Easter in the evangelical church that I see that I want to challenge you. I think we need to address in our churches, and I would be concerned if I see a church in my community that's engaging in all 3 of these troubling trends. Now, does that mean they're a bad church? Absolutely not. But I do think these are conversations that we have to have. And this goes beyond just Easter, because these same kind of troubling trends tend to be the slippery slope that leads to bigger things like spiritual abuse and the scandals that we see so often. So let's start asking questions early about some of these troubling trends and challenge one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. What can we do to make sure that Jesus stays on the center stage, not just of Easter, but of our churches in general? All right, so let's start with trend number 1. Trend number 1 is seeing churches that are focusing more on ads than actual engagement. And I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen this all over social media recently. Churches are blasting social media with polished promos instead of equipping members for real relational evangelism. And more than just evangelism, real relational gospel conversations. And a gospel conversation doesn't have to mean sharing the Romans road or sharing the gospel to someone who's not saved. A gospel conversation could be sharing the good news, how it intersects and impacts a person's life anywhere that they are, including the person who doesn't have a belief or relationship with Jesus Christ being invited to accept the good news, okay? But I'm seeing these ads everywhere, and it feels like they're talking about everything but the gospel in a lot of cases. And it feels like we turn to these ads over teaching our congregants to engage with real people and their real needs in our community. Okay, so let me give you a personal example. On one single social media platform earlier this week, I saw 57 sponsored church ads for Easter and Easter events. Okay, now you may be asking, well, Jeff, did you see that over a couple of days? Did you see that over a week? No, I saw 57 church ads in less than 30 minutes on one single social media platform. And get this, how many of those 57 ads do you think were for churches in my community or within driving distance of my community? 4. 4 churches. Out of all of those 57 ads in less than 30 minutes, 4 churches were in my community. The rest of them were paying money to run an ad to someone who's not even close enough to attend their church. And the whole ad was inviting you to their church, to their event. So these ads, to me, they felt a lot more like clickbait than invitations to community. And they kind of felt like the digital version of leaving gospel tracts around. Now, you may be pro gospel tract. Maybe you had a good experience with a gospel tract. But I'm going to tell you, most of the time, it just seems like lazy evangelism to me. And if you don't know what a gospel tract is, a tract was one of these, like little printed pamphlets or whatever, and you'll see people leave them in bathroom stalls. You'll see Christians leave them on, the windshield of people's cars in a parking lot. They just drop them everywhere, and it's what I call drive-by evangelism. If you read the tract, it's going to tell you about the gospel. It's going to tell you how to pray the sinner's prayer. It's going to go through all those things. Yet, I've never met anyone, and maybe you have, I've never met anyone who is saved because they read a gospel tract, okay? I've never seen that. What I hear when people experience Jesus is I usually hear not that they experience the tracts, not that they experience an ad, but that someone that they know intersected in their life, spent time with them, met them in a time of need, shared the good news of Jesus, invited them to church, and because of that relationship, through that relationship, they actually came to be a follower of Jesus, okay? So I'm not a big fan of leaving gospel tracts, and it feels like these ads are the same kind of thing. Let's just put some information in front of you. Let's tell you about all this. Let's invite you to the church, but we're not actually going to engage with you relationally. There's not actually a real person behind that unless maybe that happens after you come to our church. Now, at least with gospel tracts, they shared the gospel rather than just an invitation to a church. A lot of these ads, sadly, you're going to notice that the gospel seems to be missing from these ads. What you're going to see instead is just a focus on events, a focus on, a thing that you can come to, entertainment, stuff like that. So the only way you get the gospel is to go to that place. And even then, you may get less of a gospel presentation at some of these churches than you would get from reading that tract in a bathroom, okay? So I believe this raises serious questions. When you see these ads, it raises a few serious questions that we have to ask. Now, I'm not saying, please hear me, I'm not saying that a church's running ads is bad. I'm not saying it's sinful. I am saying I think we've got to ask a lot of questions about them. So here are some of the serious questions that I believe, the serious concerns that I believe are raised by these. One, is this a good use of donor funds? Because how are these ads paid for? These ads are paid for people who are tithing, people who are donating. And as a longtime pastor, I can tell you there are a whole lot of Christians who are struggling financially who will give sacrificially out of money they really don't have. They will give sacrificially because they want to please God, they want to honor God, and they believe that giving sacrificially will bless them. They've heard the sermons. They've heard a lot of misused sermons. And because they believe that, they're going to give sacrificially. And I just think as church leaders and as parishioners in general, we need to make sure that we are being very careful in how we use those sacrificial gifts, those sacrificial donations that people are giving, and make sure that we're using them in a way that's effective, in a way that honors God. Now, again, why do I think these are a bad use of donor money? Well, because the majority of the ads I saw weren't from churches in my community. They weren't from churches that I could attend. And I just don't think these churches are after people who have enough money to just hop on a plane and come to them. The ads read, and when you looked at them, it looked like they were just inviting you to their church. Yet some of them, Texas, California, Oregon, Colorado, all over, there were churches that were inviting me to come to their church when I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I just don't think it was a good use of donor money. That brings it to the second point. Is it effective? Is it effective? And I just don't know that these ads are effective. Now, again, maybe you know some people who have different experiences than what I've had, but I've never met a person who said, you know what? I was saved because I went to a church on Easter because I saw an ad. And from there, I decided to follow Jesus. No, most people are going to churches on Easter because someone invited them, someone that they trust invited them. And that can happen without the ad. We need, my opinion, we need more people in the church who are willing to engage with their friends, engage with people in their community that leads to them sharing the gospel or leads to them inviting people to church, rather than just throwing out ads at people, like, again, a gospel track in a bathroom, okay? So one, I don't think this is a good use of donor funds, but we have to ask that question. Even if you disagree with me, I think it's a valid question to ask. Second question to ask, even if you disagree with me, you got to ask the question, is this effective? I don't think it is. But here's the other question, probably the biggest question out of this I think we have to ask. Are we measuring success in the church, especially around big times like Easter and Christmas? Are we measuring success the right way? And this is very important to ask around Easter because there are people who will come to churches on Easter and around Christmas who will not come any other time of the year. And churches pull out all the stops because they know that. You have an opportunity to reach people with the good news of Jesus that you may not see any other time of the year, okay? But I worked on church staffs for a long time. Large churches, small churches, mega churches, all those in between. And I'm telling you, when we talked about how successful was Easter, more often than not, what we talked about was how many people attended, and sometimes how many people checked a box on a card or how many people raised their hand during an altar call, okay? Now, what we normally didn't look as the measure of success were how many people were still coming to church and still following Jesus 6 weeks, 6 months, and 6 years later. We didn't often look at how many people were baptized and started an active discipleship relationship with someone else in the church, okay? A lot of times we would celebrate that attendance and those hands raised, and I've seen tens of thousands of people come to church on Easter services, yet what normally happens? 2 to 3 weeks later, the attendance is right back to where it was because those people came, they may have heard the gospel, they may have even raised their hand, but their lives didn't change. They never engaged with the church, okay? So again, are we measuring success the right way when we're thinking about how many people attended and how many people maybe checked a box or filled out a card? What if we started asking different questions and we said, hey, how successful was Easter? Well, we were able to follow up with 20 families, have face-to-face coffee, lunch, dinner conversations with them, and engage them in some sort of discipleship relationship. What if we looked back and we said, yeah, Easter was a success this year because, we had 50 people come to our church who came on Easter for the first time, who didn't have a relationship with Jesus. Now they're followers of Jesus, and 6 months later, they're still coming. They're still pursuing the Lord, right? That's a different way of measuring success. Yet, for a lot of churches in the evangelical world, we're going to see posts on social media about how many people came and even really good things like how many hands were raised. But are we actually following up with those raised hands? Okay, so again, trend number one, ads and advertising over actual engagement with people. Troubling trend number two in the evangelical world around Easter is it looks to me like we are positioning church as an event to attend instead of a community to belong to or a body to be. Okay, because look, church is supposed to be the gathering, the Ecclesia is supposed to be a community that I belong to. that you belong to, where we are engaged, we are breaking bread, we are doing life together, we are sharpening each other as iron sharpens iron. It is a close community that you are a part of, but it's also the Ecclesia is the body of Christ. We are supposed to be the body of Jesus, the hands, the feet of Jesus. So the church is a community that we belong to and simultaneously a body that we are, a body that we get to be. Yet, unfortunately, a lot of the times when we look at things like these church ads, when we look at how churches talk about themselves, when we look at how people give church invites, especially around Easter, doesn't it feel more like an event to attend to you? And when I'm just going to say this again, you may disagree with part of this. My concern is that when we set up or we kind of put church out there and talk about it as if it's an event to attend, that we shortchange the power of the gospel. We shortchange the power of the church. And again, too often, Easter has become an event to attend, not a body to belong to. The emphasis is on entertainment. And I want you to, again, just think about some of these things. I've seen Easter ads for multiple churches with helicopter Easter egg drops. Now, we did a post a couple of weeks ago about a helicopter Easter egg drop, and I was surprised at how many people were really pro helicopter Easter egg drop. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying any of that. I am saying they raise a lot of questions. So if a church is doing this, they should be ready for financial questions about how they're using donor money and everything else. I'm not sure that those things are successful and leading a lot of people to Jesus. But regardless of how you feel about those, advertising a helicopter Easter egg drop as the main draw to get people to church, that's an emphasis on entertainment. Come be entertained. See a spectacle. What are some of the other things that I've seen? I've seen a lot of talk about massive, sometimes record-setting Easter egg hunts. Okay, we've seen about, hey, come and see all the fun events and the inflatables and all those things. There's nothing wrong with inflatables for the kids. There's nothing wrong with events like those, right? But that's what I'm seeing in these ads. That's what I'm seeing on these invites. That's what I'm hearing people talk about is come to our church for the event that we're having at Easter. And if we're not careful, the emphasis is more on entertainment than it is the gospel. Now, many of the posts that I've read, many of the ads that I've seen, they say a lot more about things like coffee bars, entertaining events, and family photo ops than they actually do about Christ crucified. Okay, so again, I know many of these churches, they are sharing the gospel when you get there, but the problem is if you had to get them there, you had to get people there just through entertainment, it is going to affect the way they engage with and see the church. If you want to know, I really believe this, if you want to know why so many Christians live out and treat the church kind of like consumer Christianity and, hey, entertain me, make sure that I'm getting a good word, make sure that the music's good, the light's good, all that. Why do we treat it like consumer Christianity? It's because many of us were brought into our first experiences with the church with an entertain me event mindset, okay? Now, some churches, they're going even farther than this, okay? They're going so far to be relevant and inviting this Easter with the event mentality that they cross a line that I believe goes too far. With things like, the churches that are saying, we'd love to see you this Easter. And they're marketing Easter because of 420 and the connections with 420. They're basically using marijuana and drugs and stuff like that to actually get people in. We'd love to see you this Easter with all the green stuff, right? And this particular church right here, they did an ad like that. It got sent to me. By the time I checked it out, they had already taken it down. But when I went to their page, what did I see? A record-setting biggest Easter egg hunt in Arkansas, or in this part of Arkansas, or whatever it was.
Would you like to be a part of history in the making? We are going to have the largest egg hunt in Northwest Arkansas, 30,000 eggs. There's going to be a petting zoo, there's going to be pony rides, there's going to be pictures with the Easter Bunny.
So all of their focus, whether it's from the big record-setting Easter egg hunt or we'd love to see you on 420, everything they're doing to invite people is about entertainment. It's about events. It's about these sort of things. Now, you also have, that was Brand New Church that did that, but you also have churches like Action Church that went even farther. They did a whole Easter invite video where the guy's getting out of the car with smoke coming out of the car, and he's inviting people. Hey, you got the munchies on 420? Come with us. We got breakfast for you, all that.
Got the munchies? We got a hot breakfast ready to be served at 9:15. Service starts at 10 o'clock. We'd love to have you as our personal guest on Easter Sunday at Action Church.
Now, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do, what you believe. You should be welcome in the church. So I think that part of that is really good. But when we're using 420 and we're using weed to invite people to church, I think we missed the plot, fam. I think we've absolutely missed the plot. We're inviting people to see a man who died on a cross, who said, if you want to follow me, you got to deny yourself, you got to crucify your flesh, you got to take up your own cross, and you got to follow me. That message is not quite the same as going, hey, you want to follow me and you're, already enjoying yourself for 420 and you got the munchies, well, go ahead and come on, right? I think that crosses the line of inviting people into church where they don't necessarily understand what it is. And here's the thing, a lot of those people would already be coming to church. They're already tired of what they're already getting in their lifestyle. They're already looking for something more than what they're getting every day, what they're seeing in the world. And they're going to church because it's expected on Easter, because they're searching for something. And instead, what are they seeing? They're seeing the church invite them with the same tired stuff they see in the world all day. They already get good entertainment. They don't need to be entertained by the church. Now, does that mean that church shouldn't be fun or entertaining? No. But what they're looking for is not entertainment. They're not looking for the church to welcome them in on 420 and talk as much about weed as they're talking about Easter. That's not what they're looking for. And unfortunately, stuff like this, what Brand New Church did, what Action Church did, a lot of other churches did it, these are clear attempts at viral reach over meaningful substance, okay? People are coming to church on Easter because they're looking for something more. People are coming to church because they're looking for something more. Why would we water down and dilute it and say, we'll just entertain you like the rest of the world is doing? Hey, Disruptors, Jeff here with what is probably the worst sales pitch of all time. But at Church Disrupted and SAI, we don't have big donors. We don't have corporate sponsors, and we definitely don't want to sell out or try to sell you random stuff just to keep the ministry going. But what we do have is you, this community. Because the Spiritual Abuse Institute and the Church Disrupted podcast are 100% donor funded. And that means that we rely on people like you, listeners who care, survivors who get it, and advocates who just want to see the church do better. Now, last year, we came up short by about $2,500 every month. Now, the good news is our board made up the difference out of pocket. And listen, we were really glad to do it. But we also know that that's not sustainable in the long run. So this spring, we're launching the I Disrupt campaign to raise $2,500 a month in recurring donations. Because it's not about a few big checks or big donors. It's about a lot of us doing a little. You give as little as $5 a month, you're literally sponsoring the show. No matter how much or how little you give, you are investing in the long-term future of this work. So whether you give big or small, we want to pour back into you as well through things like monthly Zoom calls, early access to new resources, a private line to ask questions and to shape the content that you see here. And I'm really excited about being able to give you some links to join some of our weekly live streams and podcast recordings live, where you can ask questions right there live on the call. And you can find more information about the different ways we're giving back to our sponsors and recurring donors at spiritualabuse.institute or at the link below in the description. But if this podcast has ever encouraged you, challenged you, or made you feel seen, you can be a part of helping us continue this work and to do more than ever this year. Because here's the deal, we're not going to stop until spiritual abuse is rare and safe, accountable churches are the norm. So thank you for being a part of this with us, and thank you for helping us disrupt spiritual abuse and toxic church systems. Again, so that's troubling trend number 2, positioning the church as an event to attend instead of a community to belong to or a body to be. That follows troubling trend number 1, which is we're engaging people with ads instead of engaging them relationally. And here's troubling trend I see with Easter and the evangelical world. Trend number 3, it's the easy believism trap. Now, I know we got people who listen to Church Disrupted from all different ends of the theological spectrum, okay? So different people are going to have different views on what salvation looks like, what salvation means, okay? But here's the deal. I think we could probably, most of us agree that there is a shiny trap of easy believism in evangelical circles right now that doesn't necessarily reflect what the Bible teaches about following Jesus, okay? Look, big attendance, salvation numbers, all that sort of stuff. Big attendance, salvation numbers are used to silence critics most of the time and to silence critiques and justify all these big events. Hey, you can talk about the big helicopter Easter egg drop and whether it was worth it or not, but you know what, Jeff? People got saved. And because people got saved, it's worth it, okay? Now, here's a couple of questions I would ask, though. 1, did that person only go to church because of the big helicopter Easter egg drop, okay? Or would they have went to church on Easter anyway? But the other thing, a lot of times with these, and I'm not saying that a person couldn't come to church because the helicopter Easter egg drop and then enter into a real relationship with Jesus. That's absolutely possible. But I think we've got to ask some other questions when we justify this stuff, this big spending, this questionable behavior, the we'd love to see you things. And we say, look, a lot of people came, a lot of people were saved. What exactly are we counting? I think we got to ask that question. What do we mean a lot of people were saved? What does it mean when we say people were saved? Okay? Because here's what we mean in a lot too many evangelical circles. We mean someone raised their hand with their heads bowed and their eyes closed at the end of the service. Or we mean someone filled out a card. They checked the box, I prayed to receive Jesus, right? We may never talk to them. We may never have a discipleship conversation with them. We may never see any fruit from their lives. And that's what we're saying. Well, look, we had all these people saved, so it was worth it. Yet, again, I would ask how many of those people were still connected to any church in any way 6 weeks later? Because sometimes I think we can get so caught up in the event and the justifications for the events that we get caught in this easy believism trap. So here's what I want to do. For this section, for this troubling trend, I just want to compare and contrast modern church altar calls with the biblical models. Okay, so what does the Bible say? In Luke 14, Jesus said, before you do anything like, following Jesus, you should count the cost. Now remember, Jesus is the one who said, if you want to follow me, you got to be willing to hate your father and mother. You got to be willing to leave everything. If you want to follow me, you got to deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me. But in Luke 14, Jesus talks about counting the cost. Before you build a building, make sure that you're counting the cost and you got enough money to finish it. Before you go to war, make sure that you've got what you need to be able to go to war. You've got to count the cost because nothing's worse than being the person who sets out to do something, whether that's building a house, going to war, or following Jesus. You didn't count the cost and then you walk away, right? That's how Jesus talked about following him. He talked about counting the cost, taking up your cross, denying yourself and following him. In Acts 2, okay? In Acts 2, Peter is preaching and a lot of people come to know Jesus. A lot of people become followers of the way, all right? But what happened? They were baptized, which was a public declaration. I'm a part of the way. I'm a part of this new faith. And oh, by the way, what just happened in this new faith? What is the biggest thing that ever happened in it? Oh yeah, the leader of the faith was crucified and killed. Why? Because he claimed to be the Messiah. Okay, so this was dangerous to publicly declare, I'm a follower of the way. I'm a follower of this new faith. I'm a follower of this Jesus guy. To publicly declare that was to put yourself as potentially an enemy of Rome, to put yourself as an enemy of Judaism, which is what when Peter was preaching to this group, he was preaching to Jews who were there in Jerusalem to celebrate their own religion of Judaism. That's what was happening here, okay? what happened besides them getting baptized? They became a part of a deep community. They began to eat together every day. They began to pray together every day. They began to meet and do these things. Their lives were turned upside down, and they made a dangerous public declaration. That's what it looked like in Acts 2 to follow Jesus. In Acts 16, we see Paul and Silas put in jail, and we see that, man, they're being released from jail. Their chains have fallen off, the doors have opened, and the jailer is ready to off himself because he is so scared. If these people escaped, I am going to be killed. I'm going to be punished. And he is so scared of what might happen at the hands of the Roman authorities that he says, oh my gosh, I'm going to hurt myself. Okay, that's what he's going to do. And instead, Paul and Silas, they say, whoa, we're still here. Okay, the chains fell off, the doors are open, we're still here. And what was the jailer's response? He said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? And what did they tell him? Believe, you and your whole household. And when they believed, what happened? This guy went from being so scared of what would happen from his superiors if these guys got freed that he was willing to unalive himself. He went from being so scared over that now he's immediately baptized and has Paul and Silas at his house. He's publicly declared, I'm with these guys. I'm a part of the way. And he went from being terrified of what people would think, terrified of losing, to being willing to lose everything. Because every time someone followed Jesus, we see in the New Testament, when they became a follower of Jesus, a follower of the way, the first thing that happened was they were baptized and they publicly declared, hey, I'm with the way, knowing how dangerous that it was. And it transformed the way that they lived their lives. The New Testament offers no model of silent, anonymous conversion. Salvation in the New Testament, following Jesus, was costly, it was communal, and it was transforming. Okay? So that's what it looked like to become a follower of Jesus in the New Testament. Now, altar calls have been around for a while, but they're very different today than they were, a century ago. Old altar calls, even when I was growing up as a kid in church, old altar calls would look something like this. Let's see if you remember this, if you've been around church for a while. You would walk up to the very front of the church during the invitation where they're playing like Just As I Am or some song like that. You would walk up in front of the whole church. The pastor would pray with you. The pastor would answer your questions. He would make sure that you understood what it looked like to follow Jesus, that you understood what salvation was. And then that same pastor would present you after the invitation. He would present you and your decision to follow Jesus to the whole church. Everything happened in front of the whole church publicly. I've decided to follow Jesus. I want to become a member of the church, right? And now the whole church knew about your decision. And because they knew about that, they could partner together in discipling you and holding you accountable because you were a part of a community to belong to. You were a part of a body where you were supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Then what else would they do in those old altar calls? They would schedule a baptism because you needed to be baptized. If you're following Jesus, you need to go public and be baptized. And again, after they scheduled that baptism, they would put you on the church roll as an active member. And now the church sees you as an active member. They are holding you accountable. They're taking an active role in discipling you, okay? So you have the New Testament model, be willing to be baptized, to have your life transformed, and put yourself in danger to follow Jesus. That's why Jesus said you should count the cost first. Old altar calls have to come in front of the whole church, so there's no danger, but there's definitely discomfort. I come in front of the whole church, I declare my intentions, I get baptized, and I become a member of the church. I'm now an active community. I'm being held accountable. Well, let's compare and contrast both of those with modern altar calls in many evangelical churches, okay? They go a little something like this. And again, as a pastor, I've done these. I just don't think they're effective. I don't think they're super biblical. So we say things like this. All right, everybody, why don't you bow your head? Why don't you close your eyes? No one's looking around except me. It's just me and you. You can make a decision to follow Jesus and no one would ever know. Now, here's what I want you to do. If you want to go to heaven instead of hell, because who doesn't want to make that choice between heaven and hell? Of course, I want to go to heaven. That's the way it's framed so many times. If you want to go to heaven instead of hell, We need to follow Jesus. So to do that, I just want you, if you want to pray this prayer so that you know you're going to go to heaven, what I want you to do, I want you to repeat this prayer with me. We don't explain salvation a lot of times. We don't walk people through why they're praying that prayer and what that means and why it should change their lives afterwards. We don't walk them through counting the cost. So nobody's looking around. You repeat this prayer with me, and then, hey, you know what? If you prayed that prayer, would you just raise your hand? Nobody's looking around, just me and you. Would you just raise your hand? And people are, they're sliding up their hands. They're almost scared a lot of times to let that one person know that they prayed that prayer, right? And then what do? Hey, everybody look up. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate all these anonymous people. And here's what we're going to ask you to do. If that was you, would you just fill out a card? Let us know you made that decision. Sometimes they're followed up with, sometimes they're not. If they fill out that card, then we'll baptize them at some point. And we'll tell them they should probably join a small group. That's normally how that goes. But here's the reality. And again, I'm speaking as a longtime pastor. A large percentage of those people never go beyond a raised hand and a prayed prayer. They never have a conversation with anyone. They're not answering the follow-up. They're never talking to another believer one-on-one. They're never asking questions. They raised their hand. They said they prayed a prayer, and they disappeared. Of those who actually follow up and get baptized, many of them disappear and never really are followed up with, never really are discipled afterwards. They get baptized, and then 6 months later, nobody really knows where they're at. Now, is that always the case? No. There are plenty of people who were truly saved, truly baptized, their lives change, but many of them aren't. And I think we just got to ask the question, are we falling into this easy believism trap where we're telling people that following Jesus looks like quietly raising a hand, being anonymous, and not changing anything? When we treat salvation as a lifelong decision that should be massively celebrated and followed up with discipleship instead of a quick, semi-anonymous, event to count and to quantify, I think that's more helpful, not only to the new believer, I think it's more helpful to the kingdom and the local church body. When we treat altar calls like they're cattle calls or assembly lines where you have a quick prayer, a raised hand, a box checked, and then you move on, I feel like we do a disservice to everyone involved. And I know it feels good in the moment and we all want to celebrate, but it feels like if we would go a little deeper and we would help people count the cost and we would invite them into a transformed life and a changed eternity, that it could be a lot more powerful. So those are the three trends, the three concerns that I have, that we fall into the easy believism trap, especially around Easter, that we're turning to advertising over engaging with people, right? And that we're treating the church like it's an event instead of a community to belong to and a body to be. But what can we do about those troubling trends? What do those troubling trends mean to you and to me as believers, to you and to me as potentially church leaders, for the church leaders who are listening? I think there's three takeaways. There's three ways that churches can buck these trends to make the most of Easter, to love people well, and to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Number one, I think we engage people, not just platforms. That we, not only as church leaders, but everybody involved in the church, from the youngest to the oldest, we invest in actual relationships and actual conversations, not just impressions and ad metrics. Instead of giving people thousands of cards to give out or spending money on these ads, what if we just encourage people? Hey, find people your friends, your family, people in your community, and have a conversation with them about how they see faith, how they view God, questions they may have. See if they're open to an invitation from church. I think that means a lot more than just these quick invitations or, the ads or dropping by an invite on their car. Number two, I think we celebrate with reverence, okay? Look, creativity and fun should be welcomed in the church, but the cross at the same time has to remain central, okay? Because here's the truth, and I heard this all the time in ministry, and it is so true. What we win people with is what we win them to. So if you win people with big entertainment and gimmicks, what you're winning them to is a Christianity that they believe is based off entertainment and gimmicks. You're winning them to consumer Christianity. And I just don't think that's a real Christianity at all. There's no cost to it. But there's also this, what we win people with is also what we have to keep them with. So if you're getting people to attend your church and what you had to do to get them to attend your church and listen to a sermon was to drop eggs from a helicopter and to have this huge entertainment and do all these big events and break a record and all that sort of stuff, then if you're not doing that every week, you're not going to keep them at your church. Because for the most part, what you win people with is what you also have to keep them with. It's what their expectation is of the church. So what would happen if we dropped all of that stuff and we focused instead on winning people to the gospel? We won people by sharing the good news, okay? We got people to connect with the church to follow Jesus by simply sharing the good news of who Jesus is and what he did for them and what it can do for their lives. And then what if we continued to reach them and keep them by preaching that good news about how Jesus changes their lives and how to follow Jesus in the long term? And look, maybe I'm crazy, but I just believe that Jesus is and has always been and will always be enough. I don't think we need all of that extra stuff. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to say this. I think a lot of times that extra stuff that we think is helping us get people in the church doors is actually distracting people from experiencing Jesus in a way that would change their lives for forever. And here's the third challenge. I think one of the ways that we best buck this trend, these troubling trends, is to count disciples instead of decisions. Count disciples instead of decisions. We really need to rethink in the church how we measure success in ministry. Okay, think about the Great Commission, and we're going to do a whole longer video on this soon where we break down the Great Commission from an Eastern mindset, because Christians massively misunderstand the Great Commission and what the disciples would have heard when Jesus gave them that commission. But the Great Commission, think about it. It's not a call to make converts, go and make converts. It's a call to go and make disciples, lifelong disciples, okay? And again, we have almost turned the Great Commission into a call to make converts today, and I think it's bad. I think it's an unbiblical trade that hurts the kingdom of God and everyone in it. Okay, so here's how I want to end the video today. Easter is a celebration. It's a celebration of death defeated and of life resurrected. It's a celebration of what Jesus did on the cross that literally changed the world forever. Let's not bury that celebration. Let's not bury what Jesus did on Easter under gimmicks. Because what we win people with, again, it's what we win them to. And if we use entertainment to draw them in, we can't be surprised when they treat faith like a consumeristic show later. But if we lift up Jesus, he promised us he would draw people to himself. And when he does, when he draws people to himself, it transforms their lives forever. So let me ask you this as we finish the podcast today. In your church, in my church, are we offering people the real gospel this Easter? Or are we just offering them a good time and a religious box to check until next Easter rolls around? Let's talk about it. What do you agree with from this episode? What do you disagree with? What are some lessons that we can learn that maybe I missed? Let's talk about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. What does celebrating Easter look like in your community? Do you see some trends that excite you? Do you see trends that concern you? What are some of the trends that you're seeing? Because maybe you're seeing different things than I'm seeing. Let's have a real conversation about what it means to follow Jesus in a world full of distractions. Because this Easter, I just believe this with all my heart and all my soul. If we would just share the good news of who Jesus is and how he loves people, it would change everything. It'll make way more of an impact than if we focus on entertainment and if we focus on big draws that look like the world. So, I want to see Jesus lifted high this Easter. I think you do too. And if you see some of these troubling trends in your church, doesn't mean it's a bad church, but it may be worth having some conversations after Easter with your pastor. And I will say this, please don't have these conversations with your church before Easter. Everything's already planned. Everything's already happening. They're already stressed. That's not going to change anything. But it could be a really good opportunity to start having these conversations after Easter with your pastors, with your church leaders, with other church parishioners to say, hey, how can we buck some of these troubling trends and focus on what really matters? How can we put Jesus on the center stage, not just for Easter, but every single Sunday? How can we invite people to a community that will always be there for them, they can always belong to no matter what? And how can we invite people to being a part of a body the hands and feet of Jesus that literally changes the world. If we'll ask those questions and we'll have those conversations, I think God can do something special like we have never dreamed of and like we've never seen in the church today. And in an age full of church scandals, in an age full of spiritual abuse allegations, what if we just pursued Jesus? What if we shared the good news and the cost of following Jesus? What if we were focused on being the hands and feet and having hard discussions and uncomfortable conversations about anything that gets in the way of looking like Jesus, loving like Jesus, and telling people about Jesus? Because here's what I know. Most of the people that I talk to, they have no problem with Jesus. They love Jesus. They are drawn to Jesus. They are magnetized toward Jesus. If they have a problem with the church and Christianity, it's just that. It's the church, it's the people, it's the systems when we don't look like Jesus. So together, let's have these conversations. Let's look like Jesus, and let's invite people to experience him the same way that I hope you have, and I know I have.